Late October in downtown Asheville, Sloan Merrick sat alone at a sidewalk coffee table on Haywood Street, pale blue dress, red handbag at her feet, a silver notebook beside a half-finished espresso. A small girl with brown braids and an owl-shaped hairpin stepped to her chair and took hold of her hand. "Ma'am, could you be a mommy for me? My daddy is very sad." Sloan's lips parted. 10 steps back, a man in a gray t-shirt dropped a grocery bag and ran. "Ren, I'm sorry, ma'am." He did not look up. The notebook's logo caught the light. Merrick Urban Holdings. Holt Aberdeen said he was sorry 3 more times before they reached the parking lot on Walnut Street. He crouched to gather the fallen groceries, a carrot, 2 oranges, a bunch of parsley, and felt the heat climb into his ears and stay there. Ren did not say anything. She held the straps of her owl backpack with both hands and looked at the ground while her eyes filled. Back at the coffee shop, Sloan sat very still. She could still feel where the small hand had been. She bent down and picked something off the concrete beside her chair. A hairpin the shape of a tiny owl, brass, warm from the afternoon. She turned it over once, hesitated, then slid it into the pocket of her dress. That night, in a 2-bedroom walk-up in West Asheville, Holt made macaroni and cheese. Ren pushed it around her plate without eating. She set her spoon down and looked up. "Did I say something wrong, Daddy?" He sat beside her on the couch, searched for the right words, spoke slowly. Mommy was not something a person could replace. The woman at the coffee shop was a stranger. Ren couldn't do that again. Ren nodded. Her eyes were still red when she said, "But you are sad, Daddy. I see it." Holt could not answer that. He opened the bottom drawer of the side table and took out an old cotton scarf that still carried the faint, dry sweetness of orange blossom, Caroline's perfume, the one bottle Ren would not let him throw away. He handed the scarf to his daughter. She pressed it to her cheek, curled up, and fell asleep on the couch with it balled under her chin. Holt sat on the back stoop for a long time after that, looking at the small, unlit yard. He opened his phone to the last photograph he had of Caroline, smiling in a hospital day room in front of a whiteboard she had been sketching on, her hair thinned to fine, pale wisps. He did not cry. He closed the phone. At the Grove Park Inn, Sloan set the owl pin on the nightstand and looked at it until the brass turned soft in the lamplight. She opened her laptop and typed the first 3 letters of the man's last name into a search bar. Then she closed the tab. She did not want to know who he was out of curiosity. She wanted to know only if the day decided to bring him back. Monday morning, Sloan walked into the satellite office of Merrick Urban Holdings on Patton Avenue. Her assistant slid a folder across the desk. The short list of regional artisans for the Montfort Historic Restoration, a row of 6 Victorian houses built in 1903, long neglected, structurally sound. Second on the list, circled in pencil by someone on the procurement team, was a line that read, "Aberdeen Woodworks. Proprietor, Holt Aberdeen. West Asheville." She read it twice. Something shifted behind her sternum. But Sloan Merrick did not believe in coincidence as an answer. She believed in it as a question. She gathered the file, picked up her keys, and drove. The workshop sat inside an old timber warehouse off Haywood Road, a small hand-carved sign above the door. Holt was planing an oak board when the bell rang. He looked up and froze. They stood 4 meters apart for a long moment, and neither of them spoke. Sloan spoke first, in the even voice she used for boardrooms. "Mr. Aberdeen, I came on business. Your shop was recommended for the wood restoration work on the Montfort district. If it isn't comfortable for you, I'll find someone else." She set a card on his workbench. Sloan Merrick, Chief Executive Officer, Merrick Urban Holdings. Holt looked at the card, then looked at her. For the first time, in daylight, he saw her face clearly. Gray eyes, a small, thin scar at the left temple. He nodded. He did not trust a sentence yet. Sloan drove Holt to the Montfort site that same afternoon. 6 Victorian houses stood along a short brick street under the slanted October sun, their paint peeling, 2 windows boarded, the gingerbread trim chipped but intact. The bones of them were all still there. She explained the project as they walked. Full restoration, no demolition, no new construction. The fund had purchased the whole row under a preservation covenant, a binding promise to keep 100% of the original architecture. They would repair, not reinvent. The principal architect had set that philosophy before Sloan had ever come in. Holt stepped into the first house slowly. The floors were laid in narrow quarter-sawn oak. The joinery at the door surrounds was dovetail. The staircase spiraled up to a half landing with a walnut handrail worked in a detail he recognized the way a man recognizes his own handwriting on an envelope he has forgotten he sealed. He and Caroline had argued about that handrail across a kitchen table 10 years ago when she was preparing a portfolio bid on this block for a private client who had quietly walked away. He kept his voice level. "Who's the principal architect of record?" Sloan opened the silver notebook. "Caroline Aberdeen. Aberdeen and Vance, Chicago. She completed the full concept design before she passed 3 years ago. I've been looking for someone with the chops to execute." Holt turned to the window and set his palm flat on the casing. His fingers shook once. For 15 seconds, he was not in Montford. He was in a hospital room in Chicago, and Caroline was wearing the wool cap she had knitted herself, and she had his hand in both of hers. "Promise me," she was saying. "Promise me you'll come back to the work when you're ready. Don't let Wren grow up thinking her father ran away." He had nodded. He had not said it out loud. "Mr. Aberdeen," Sloan said, "you seem familiar with the period." "I read a lot," he said. She did not press him, but her eyes followed the way his fingertips traced the casing, and it was not the touch of a carpenter measuring a job. It was the touch of someone who had once drawn the line that made the wood this shape. On the drive back to the workshop, she asked about Wren. He hesitated, then told her the clean version. His wife had died of cancer 3 years earlier. He and his daughter had moved to Asheville to be close to her grandparents. He worked wood because it let him be home in the afternoons when she finished school. Sloan listened without interrupting. At the workshop, before she stepped out of the car, Sloan said quietly, "On Saturday, at the coffee shop, your daughter did nothing wrong. Please don't make her apologize to me again." Holt looked at her. He did not look down. He nodded. That night, Holt went out to the garage behind the walk-up and dug through the boxes he had not opened since the move from Chicago. Between a pair of rolled-up plotter prints, wrapped in a linen sleeve gone gray with dust, he found a cardboard tube. He pulled out the roll inside. Caroline's first Montford sketch, charcoal and pencil, dated 2 years before her diagnosis. In the lower right corner, in his own pencil, were structural notes on the spiral stair. "Load paths," a small annotation in his cramped handwriting. He had worked on this project with her. He had forgotten. He sat down on the garage floor with the roll across his knees and cried for the first time in 3 years. Not for Caroline. He had cried enough for Caroline. For the piece of them he had let himself forget. Wren woke and came downstairs. She did not ask. She sat down next to him, put her head on his shoulder, and kept the scarf balled in one small fist. In Charlotte, Preston Dalrymple drafted an email at 11 that night. He sent it to 2 members of the board. "I have the votes to strike Montford from the portfolio. Give me 2 weeks." 2 days later, Sloan came back to the workshop with a signed contract draft in a leather folio. Holt had prepared a detailed estimate the night before, but when she stepped in, he had set something else on the workbench beside it, the cardboard tube from the garage. He did not open the tube. He said, "I need to tell you a few things before we sign anything." She sat down on a wooden stool opposite him. The coffee he had poured her went untouched. He told her a short, true version. He had been a licensed architect. He had been a principal at Aberdeen and Vance in Chicago. He had worked on the Montford concept with Caroline before she got sick. He had not touched architecture in 3 years. Sloan was silent for a long time. Then she said slowly, "Then you're not just a woodworker on a short list. You are the only person alive who can finish this project the way she wanted it finished." He shook his head. "I don't want to come back as an architect. I just want to do the wood, for her." She did not argue. She closed her folio, thought for a breath, and proposed it back to him. He would be lead woodworker. His name would not appear under the architectural credit on the public record. She would hire a supervising architect of record separately, but on every wood detail, from joinery to species selection to sealant finish, Holt would have final say. She wrote 2 lines of that into the contract by hand and pushed it back across the workbench. He read, he nodded, he signed. As she gathered her folio to leave, Wren came out of the back room. She had been dropped off after school and had been listening from the threshold. She stopped Sloan at the door with both hands tucked behind her back. "Ma'am, I'm sorry about the coffee shop. I didn't mean to make you sad." Sloan knelt down to meet her eyes. The careful, professional stillness that had been on her face since Saturday went out of it. "I wasn't sad, Wren. I just didn't know how to answer. She took the owl pin out of the pocket of her coat and set it in the girl's palm. This is yours. I was holding it for you. Ren's eyes got very big. She smiled for the first time in 3 days. Thank you, ma'am. Sloane looked up past Ren's shoulder at Holt, not for permission. To check whether the moment would cost him something, he stood at the bench with his hand still on the contract and nodded, just once. Holt walked her to her car. The light had gone blue. He said, thank you. She doesn't need a mother. She needs a grown-up who will sit at her eye level. Sloane said, I'm not good with children, but she's easy, and you are a better father than you think you are. He stood at the curb and watched her taillights turn off Haywood, and he could not find any sentence to answer with. In Charlotte that night, Preston called Sloane. He asked about the timeline. She told him, in her level voice, that she had closed the restoration team and Montford was on schedule. He laughed thinly through the line. Good, I hope so. The board is going to be very interested in your personnel choices. She hung up and frowned at the dark window of her hotel room. She had heard that tone before. It was the tone of a man already halfway across the room with a knife. She just did not yet know how far he had walked. Holt lay on the couch that night with the lamp off. He thought about how Sloane had knelt down to Ren's eye level, how she had kept the owl pin for 3 days, how she had not asked him to describe Caroline beyond the part he was ready to say. He realized it had been 3 years since he had looked at a woman for more than 10 seconds. He turned his face into the cushion and closed his eyes. The following Saturday, Sloane drove downtown to the Hollow Oak Bookshop on Lexington Avenue. The shop sat inside one of the brick storefronts Merrick Urban had flagged for Phase 2 of the restoration. She had a meeting with the owner about the facade work. Merritt Calloway was 62, silver hair cut short, round glasses, a gray cardigan over a black turtleneck. She had been running the store since 1998. Sloane walked her through the preservation covenants, the historic tax credit structure, the noise timeline for the Phase 2 construction window. Merritt took notes in a composition book. Before Sloane left, she drifted through the aisles. She stopped in the children's section and picked a blue hardcover off a middle shelf. The House That Moved. A picture book about a house that lifts itself off its foundation and walks out to find the people it belongs to. She did not know why she bought it. She only knew she wanted to give it to Ren. Merritt wrapped it in brown paper at the counter and tied it with twine. She looked at Sloane over her round glasses. Who's it for? A contractor's daughter. She's 8. Merritt's hands stopped for half a second on the knot. Then she finished the tie and handed the package over. I hope she likes it. Late afternoon, Sloane drove to Aberdeen Woodworks with the package on the passenger seat. Ren took it, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, thank you. Sloane stood in the doorway and glanced at Holt. May I sit and read some of it with her? If it isn't a bother? Holt did not know how to answer. He nodded. Sloane pulled a small wooden stool up beside Ren and opened the book. Holt went back to planing a board that did not need planing, but he listened to every sentence. Sloane was not a polished reader. She stumbled on a word here and there, paused in the wrong places. But she read at the tempo a child wanted. Ren laughed when the house in the book jumped a fence to follow a smell of bread. In Charlotte, at a quiet corner table at a restaurant off Tryon Street, Preston Dalrymple met 2 board members. He passed a folder across the white cloth. It contained an invented accounting narrative. Sloane had misused fund capital at Montford, hiring an unlicensed woodworker in place of a credentialed architect to pocket the spread. One of the board members flipped a page. Evidence? Preston smiled, thin and small. I'm assembling it. Back in the workshop, Ren yawned when the story ended. Sloane stood to leave. Ren grabbed a fistful of her jacket. Are you coming tomorrow, too? Sloane looked to Holt, checking again. He nodded slightly. Sloane crouched. I have meetings tomorrow, but I'll stop by in the afternoon. Out on the gravel lot. Just as she put her key in the ignition, Sloane's phone rang. Merritt Calloway. The bookseller rarely called first. Miss Merrick, Merritt said. Her voice had slowed. I need to ask straight. That book you bought this afternoon, is it for Holt Aberdeen's daughter? Sloane felt the air leave the car. How do you know? Caroline Aberdeen was my roommate in college. I've known Ren since she could walk. 3 seconds of silence. Then Merritt said, there is something you should know, but I'm not the one who should tell you. When Holt is ready, he will. Sloane hung up and sat in the car with her hands flat on the wheel. She had the distinct feeling of stepping, without meaning to, into a story larger than a contract. That same night, an anonymous email hit her inbox. It was Preston, writing as a concerned board member, demanding she account for the Montford personnel decisions at the end-of-month session. Sunday morning, Sloane asked Holt if he would walk the Montford site with her one more time before she signed off on the lumber order. Wren asked to come along. She wanted to see where her dad was going to work. Holt hesitated, then agreed. The three of them walked the brick street in October sun. Wren ran ahead, the blue book pressed against her coat. She stopped at the fourth house, the one with the spiral stair in the round attic window, and she clapped once. "Daddy, this house looks like the one in my book. It wants to go somewhere." Holt stopped short. That was the house Caroline had loved most in the block. She had sketched it first, and she had called it, privately, the dreaming house. He had never told anyone. Not Wren, not the draftsman, not a single soul. Sloane did not know that detail. She only watched. She saw Holt's hand come up to rest on the doorframe with a tenderness that did not belong to a contractor assessing a job. She did not ask. Wren ran up the spiral stair. Holt and Sloane followed. In the attic, the round window caught the afternoon and dropped a warm disk of light onto the old pine floor. Wren stepped into it, spun once, and grinned. "Daddy, it's so pretty up here. Could you build it so I can sleep here?" Holt laughed. It was the first laugh Sloane had heard out of him. "This house isn't ours, sweetheart," Sloane said evenly, "but one of these will be kept as a community space. It could be a children's library." She looked at Wren. "You can come and read here anytime you want." Wren looked at her the way you look at a person who has just promised a miracle. On the walk back, Wren took Sloane's hand without asking. Sloane went still for half a beat. She did not pull away. Holt, walking a half step behind, looked off down the street to hide something that was rising in his chest. In Charlotte, Preston's desk filled with glossy prints, delivered in a manila envelope by the private investigator he had hired. Sloane holding Wren's hand at Montford. Sloane on the stool in the workshop reading a picture book. Sloane and Holt walking side by side. He did not need the images as blackmail against Sloane's private life. He needed them as Exhibit A for a conflict of interest complaint against a sitting CEO. He slid the best three into a labeled folder and sent them to his attorney along with a note. Prepare the motion for a vote of no confidence. That night, after Wren was asleep, Holt called Sloane. The first time he had called her first. "Thank you for promising Wren a library. You didn't have to." Sloane said, "I didn't promise it for you. I promised it because the project needs a soul." And she showed me what that house should do. There were a few seconds of phone silence. Then Holt said, very quietly, "My wife used to call that house the dreaming house. I never told anyone that, not even Wren." Sloane's silence was longer. Finally, she said, "Then we'll build her dream back." She hung up before he could answer. Monday morning, Sloane went to the Hollow Oak for a second meeting with Merritt about the facade timeline. They finished at 10. As Sloane reached for her bag, Merritt said, "Miss Merrick, please sit another 10 minutes. I need to give you something. I've had it for 3 years." She opened a cupboard behind the register and lifted out a small wooden box. Inside was a sealed envelope with softened edges, the addressee written in a woman's careful hand, "To whoever continues Montford when they appear." Merritt folded her hands. Caroline Aberdeen had mailed this envelope to her a few weeks before she died. The instruction had been specific. Give it only to the investor patient enough to realize that Montford was not just a restoration, it was a way for Holt to come back to himself. Caroline had not wanted to pressure her husband, so she had deliberately kept his name off the public architectural record. Instead, she had written a private letter, addressed to the future, and trusted an old friend to hold it. Sloane opened the envelope with unsteady fingers. 2 pages of handwritten letter, a small ink sketch on the second page, the attic of the fourth house, with a furniture layout marked for a children's reading room. In the corner, in Caroline's tight hand, "For Wren, when she is old enough," Sloane read. Caroline wrote that if the reader had reached this envelope, then the reader had the patience the project needed. She asked one thing: do not let Holt do Montford alone. He will refuse. He will withdraw. But if you are patient with him, he will come back to who he is. The last line of the letter read, "If my daughter one day finds someone she wants to call a mother, please do not stop her. I want her to be loved by more people, not fewer. Sloane sat in the bookshop for a long time. Merritt made tea and did not ask and did not look at her when she wiped her eyes. In Charlotte that same hour, Preston's attorney filed the evidence package with the board. The photographs, the fabricated accounting narrative, the conflict of interest complaint. The hearing was set for 9 days out. That afternoon, Sloane drove to the workshop. She did not take the letter with her. Not yet. She said, I need you to do something. At the board meeting, I need you there, on the record, as the supervising architect. Real name, real credentials, real license. Holt set down his chisel. You know I said I don't want to. She cut him. It's a gone. It's a gone, so goes a gone. It's a go, so go. It's a goes, it's a go, so gone. For the first time, her voice moved. Someone inside my company is trying to kill this project. If you don't stand up, Montfort is gone. I'm not asking you for me. I'm asking you for her. Holt stood in the middle of the shop, sawdust on his hands. Wren had come to the doorway of the back room with the book under her arm and was listening without blinking. She walked forward and took her father's hand. Daddy, if Mommy would have wanted this, you should do it. Holt sat down on the wooden stool. He looked at his hands, scarred and calloused, and they were also the hands that had drawn Riverside Cultural Pavilion. He whispered it. I'll go. Sloane did not thank him. She put her hand on his shoulder for the first time, and then she took it away. For 8 days, Sloane drove Holt to Charlotte twice to prepare with the Merrick Urban legal team. He pulled his old gray suit out of the back of the closet. He had last worn it to Caroline's funeral 3 years before. He had to walk his entire career back into his voice. Bachelor of Architecture, Cornell, 04. Master of Architecture, MIT, 07. AIA membership. Principal Architect at Aberdeen and Vance from 2011. Co-author, Riverside Cultural Pavilion, AIA National Honor Award, 2018. He read his own resume the way a man reads a stranger's. Sloane sat across from him and worked him through every page, asking the questions an adversary would ask. Wren stayed in Asheville with her grandparents. Every evening, she sent Sloane a text through her father's phone, a drawing, a question about the book, a good night. Sloane saved every one of them in a folder she did not name. The evening before the hearing, they stayed at the Merrick Urban offices on the 22nd floor past midnight. Sloane ordered pizza. They sat on the carpet of the conference room with the Montfort drawing spread around them. Holt finally asked the question he had wanted to ask. Why did you choose Montfort? There are projects with much better margins. Sloane took a moment. Then she told him. She had grown up in a neighborhood outside Savannah. Her grandmother had lost the family house, 4 generations of Merricks in one front door, when the city condemned the block for a shopping center. Sloane had been 9. Her grandmother had died a year later. From that year on, Sloane had made a rule for her career. She would invest in keeping things, not erasing them. Montfort had been the first project she had ever seen where the architect on file held the same rule. Caroline. Holt listened without breaking in. When she was done, he said, Caroline used to say that architecture isn't making the new thing. It's listening to the old thing long enough that it tells you what it wants. Sloane looked up. Under the conference room lights, she looked tired in a way that was real. She must have been an extraordinary person. Holt nodded. She was. The silence stretched. Then he said, not looking at her, looking at the drawings on the floor, for 3 years, I thought I was the only person still carrying her. You're the first person who made me feel like that wasn't true. Sloane did not answer right away. She wiped her hands on a paper napkin, set down the last slice, and said, almost too softly to hear, she isn't gone. She lives in what you choose to do next. Down the hall in his own office, Preston was reviewing his presentation. He had turned 3 of 7 board votes. He needed 1 more to swing the majority. He called Adelia Voss, the senior member, 58, the one who had been with the company longest. She did not pick up. He called twice more that night. She did not pick up. In Asheville, Wren was staying at her grandparents' house. She drew a picture that night, a house with 4 people in front of it, her father, herself, a blonde woman with Sloane's silhouette, and a softer, fainter shape behind them, her mother, the way light looks when a lamp is behind a curtain. She did not show the drawing to anyone. She folded it and tucked it inside the blue book. The next morning, the day of the hearing, Holt tied his tie with hands that shook once at the knot. Sloan poured him coffee in the prep room. You don't need to convince anyone today. Just say what Caroline believed. He nodded. Before they walked into the boardroom, Sloan's phone buzzed with a text from Adelia Voss. I will attend. But I need to hear directly why Merrick Urban has hired a woodworker for a project that should have a national-grade architect. Sloan passed the phone to Holt. He read it, took a breath, handed it back. I am not just a woodworker. I'll go in and explain that. The boardroom sat on the 22nd floor of the Merrick Urban Tower in Uptown Charlotte. 7 board members around a long walnut table. Preston Dalrymple, in a charcoal suit, arms folded, sat opposite Sloan, and he looked confident. Sloan opened with the Montford report. The budget was holding. The schedule was on track. The restoration team was closed and contracted. Preston cut in at the 3-minute mark. Miss Merrick, the schedule isn't the concern. The concern is that you have hired a woodworker without architectural credentials for a project of national historic weight. And there is evidence of a personal relationship with the contractor in question. He clicked a remote. A photograph filled the screen. Sloan holding Wren's hand at Montford. A second image. Sloan on the stool in the workshop, reading aloud. A third. Sloan and Holt walking side by side on the brick street. Adelia Voss frowned. 2 of the board members, the ones Preston had turned, nodded gravely. Sloan did not flinch. She turned to the man beside her. Mr. Aberdeen, would you introduce yourself? Holt stood. He had no notes in his hands. He spoke plainly, and his voice did not shake. My name is Holt Aberdeen, Bachelor of Architecture, Cornell, 2004, Master of Architecture, MIT, 2007, member of the American Institute of Architects, former principal architect at Aberdeen and Vance, Chicago. I am the co-author of Riverside Cultural Pavilion, which received the AIA National Honor Award in 2018. The room went very quiet. One board member picked up a water glass and set it down again without drinking. My wife, Caroline Aberdeen, was the principal architect of the Montford project. She died of cancer 3 years ago. I stopped practicing architecture not because I had lost the ability, but because I needed to be with my daughter. Miss Merrick did not hire me because of a personal relationship. She hired me because I am the only person still alive, who knows, down to the joinery, what my wife wanted for this block. He opened the cardboard tube he had carried in and rolled Caroline's first Montford sketch across the table. In the lower right corner were 2 signatures, Caroline's and his, and a date 10 years old. My wife and I drew this together. Before she knew she was sick, Adelia Voss stood up. She walked around the end of the table and looked at the drawing for a long time. Then she turned to Preston. Mr. Dalrymple, did you know this? I did not receive the full information. Adelia cut him. Then you brought a complaint to this board without checking the lead architect's file. I want to know who paid for the private investigator in your exhibit. If it was company money, that is a misuse of fund assets. Another member stood. I withdraw my support for Mr. Dalrymple's motion. I believe we need an internal review of him, not of Miss Merrick. The vote came in the kind of silence that feels like a verdict. 6-1 to retain Montford. 5-2 to open an internal review of Preston Dalrymple. Preston left the boardroom without a word. The company suspended him from his duties that same afternoon, pending the outcome of the review. Sloan and Holt were the last 2 left at the table. Holt spoke first. I didn't protect Caroline while she was alive. I'm trying to make that up. Sloan shook her head. You did more than make it up. You just saved her project. She reached into her bag and laid the envelope Merritt had kept across the wood grain between them. I think she wrote this for you. I read it before I gave it to you. I'm sorry. Holt picked it up. He did not open it. He nodded once. Holt went back to his Charlotte hotel room alone that night. Sloan took a room on another floor to give him space. He sat at the small desk by the window and broke the seal on the envelope Merritt had kept for 3 years. Caroline had written the letter to the investor who would one day continue Montford, but she had written it to a specific absence, knowing she could not know who would fill it. She asked that reader to be patient with her husband. She wrote that Holt would come to believe loving someone again was a betrayal of her. Please do not let him think that. The last line was the one Sloan had already read on her own in the bookshop. If my daughter one day finds someone she wants to call a mother, please do not stop her. I want her to be loved by more people, not fewer. Holt read that line and put his head down on the desk. He thought about Wren at the sidewalk table on Haywood Street, both small hands in the hand of a stranger, looking up to ask a question he had rushed to apologize for. Caroline would not have apologized. Caroline had written this 3 years ago, when he was still learning how to breathe without her. In the morning, he drove back to Asheville by himself. He picked up Wren at her grandparents' house. She asked, the second he walked through the door, "Did you do okay, Daddy?" He knelt down and held her. "I did okay, sweetheart." She hugged him for a long time. On the way home, he pulled over at the Hollow Oak. Merritt was straightening the children's shelves. He handed her the letter, resealed with a fresh piece of tape, and said, "Thank you for holding it until it was the right time." Merritt took it and nodded, her eyes wet behind her round glasses. Caroline knew what she was doing. She always did. He asked, "Where is Miss Merrick?" "At the fourth house. Has been since morning, 3 hours now." Holt drove to Montford and parked at the corner. He walked the short brick street. The door of the fourth house stood ajar. He climbed the spiral stair. Sloane was on the attic landing, her back to him, looking out the round window at the rest of the row. She did not turn when his step reached the top. He stopped 2 meters behind her. The midday sun came through the circle of glass and dropped the same warm disk of light onto the pine floor, the same disk Wren had spun in the week before. "I read the letter." She did not move. "She wrote it for you, even though she didn't know it would be you." Sloane turned around. Her eyes were not red, only tired. "I know. I read it before I gave it to you. I didn't have the right, but I needed to know what I was walking into." He did not take her to task for it. He nodded and stepped forward once, and then stopped, 1 meter away. He said, slowly, "I don't know if I'm ready, but I know I don't want this project to end and then have you go. And Wren doesn't either." Slowly you smiled. It was the first smile she had given in days. "I'm not going anywhere. The project's 14 months. I've leased a place in West Asheville starting next week." He nodded. The two of them stood together inside the disk of sun on the old pine floor. 14 months later, autumn came back to Asheville. The leaves on the downtown maples went yellow again. The 6 houses on the Montford block had been restored to spec. Their facades painted the original 1903 colors. The paint analysis had turned up under 18 layers of later work. The 4th house opened as the Caroline Aberdeen Community Reading House, a small free library and children's reading room. Wren, now 9, stood on the brick steps to greet guests on opening day, her hair braided, the old owl pin clipped above her ear. She still carried the house that moved, its spine now creased from being read. Holt had reopened a small architecture practice, 3 staff, named Aberdeen Studio, on the ground floor of a red brick building on Haywood Road in West Asheville. He accepted only historic restoration work. He kept the wood shop running in the bay behind the studio. Sloane had not left Asheville. She ran Merrick Urban from the downtown satellite office and flew back to Charlotte only when she had to. Preston had been dismissed for cause after the internal review confirmed his use of company funds to hire a private investigator. The board had restructured. Adelia Voss had been elected chair. At the ribbon cutting, Sloane made the first cut. Wren stood between her and Holt on the top step. When a local reporter raised a camera, Wren took both their hands on her own, the way she had done in Montford 14 months earlier. Neither adult pulled away. When most of the guests had drifted off to the coffee counter that had opened next door, the 3 of them climbed to the attic. Wren set her copy of The House That Moved on the first shelf of the children's section, the shelf for readers 7 through 10. In the guest book on the reading table, she wrote, in careful print, from Wren Aberdeen. "My mom loved this book." Holt read the lines she had written. He turned to Sloane. "She chose." Sloane nodded. She did not answer in words. Wren went down the stairs to look at the new coffee counter, leaving the 2 of them alone in the attic inside the late afternoon disk of sun under the round window. Holt looked at Sloane directly. "I'm not going to propose today. I don't know that you want that, maybe not yet, but I wanted you to know. Wren isn't the only person here who wants you to stay. I do too." Sloane smiled. Her eyes shone. "I don't need you to propose today. I only need you to stop apologizing to my daughter for the questions she asked at the coffee shop." Holt laughed. It was the second real laugh he had let out in 4 years. "I won't." He stepped forward and took her hand. Not through a sleeve, not through a coffee cup, not through a drawing. She did not pull away. She turned her palm and laced her fingers into his. Downstairs, Wren looked up past the coffee counter railing and saw her father and Sloane standing at the round window, hand in hand. She smiled and went back to the small book she had just pulled off a lower shelf. Merritt Calloway stepped into the reading room behind them and set a small framed photograph on a waiting hook. Caroline, young, laughing, standing in front of the first Montfort sketch on a studio wall. She said nothing. She only nodded at Holt. He nodded back, his mouth moving once without sound. The last of the sun came through the round window. Inside the fourth house, there were three shadows. A child on the floor below, two adults upstairs standing close. The house had stayed, and it had found the people it belonged to.